Today, we turn to a name that is now synonymous with the destructive rage of wrath. Robin Westman, a man whose wrath turned deadly, leaving behind devastation, unanswered questions, and a chilling reminder of what happens to innocent children when anger turns into violence. Robin Westman didn't appear extraordinary. He was born into a working-class family. He was quiet, reserved. He often kept to himself. Now maybe we might look back and say those were red flags, but no one thought anything dangerous of him. Those who knew him actually described him as intelligent, a little socially withdrawn, but also as someone who carried grudges a little bit longer than most. As he grew older, frustration became a very recurring theme in his life. He had failed relationships, conflicts at work, a sense of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. Instead of coping, he, now we know, bottled everything up. And that pressure, like steam in a closed chamber, only grew stronger. On August 27th of 2025, Westman, at 23 years old, dressed all in black, and he was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. He then fired multiple shots through the stained glass windows of a church adjacent to the Annunciation Catholic School just after 8:30 a.m. The significance of the time? The children and teachers had just gathered in that church for the first Mass of the year. 2 children, ages 8 and 10, were killed. 17 others were wounded, including 14 children. The sin, wrath, one of the 7 deadly sins, a force of fury so consuming, it transforms anger into something even more dangerous, an eruption that leaves nothing but destruction behind. This is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashely Willcott, a TV anchor, a former judge, trial lawyer, and I can tell you almost every single case I've seen that I've been involved with has had one of the 7 deadly sins. These cases intersect with that as the motive: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that taken too far turn deadly. This week, we break down yet another school shooting and the amount of anger that it really must take for a young adult to gun down innocent children without any regard for human life. A little later, I am joined by Bob Bianchi, a former head prosecutor, current criminal defense attorney. In our breakdown segment, we are going to go deep on the how and the why of how this could possibly happen yet again. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. Robin Westman. Now people say that he started to have some resentment that had hardened. Friends had drifted away. Family ties were frayed. And he had become increasingly isolated. Coworkers reported noticing his temper, that he would make sharp comments, that he would slam doors, that after disagreements, he would have long silence. Psychologists will tell you this, that wrath rarely appears suddenly. It builds. It waits. And for Westman, every slight, every failure, every humiliation became fuel. He began to fixate on small grievances, replaying them in his head like a movie on repeat. And apparently his anger, well, it was no longer an emotion that he felt. It became his identity. The day everything changed began like any other. But for Westman, something finally snapped. Witnesses later recalled seeing him agitated, pacing, muttering to himself. Hours later, his wrath would spill out in the most devastating way possible through violence, a school shooting, yet again another school shooting. He was armed and fueled by rage, and he turned that anger outward. The result in sheer minutes was chaos, bloodshed, and lives suddenly lost. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara told MSNBC that there was some degree of planning that went into the shooting. 2 children, aged 8 and 10, were shot dead in the pews of the church where they were going for opening services, while 15 children between the ages of 6 and 15 were injured. There were also 3 parishioners in their late 80s that were injured as well. The suspect himself, well, he died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound as law enforcement rushed to the scene. In the aftermath, survivors and investigators tried to piece together how it all went so wrong. Some pointed to mental health struggles. Others said his wrath had been visible for years, that warning signs had been ignored. But the undeniable truth was this: Robin Westman's wrath had become a storm, one that no one had stopped, and it left a trail of devastation in its wake, devastation that can never be undone. Families were shattered, communities were shaken, and a haunting reminder that unchecked anger is more than an emotion. It can be deadly. Robin Westman's story is one of wrath unleashed and the irreversible damage it left behind in another school shooting. It's a cautionary tale, one that we cannot afford to ignore. And I am so grateful joining me now, Bob Bianchi. And Bob, you are someone that when I first met you, you were anchoring at Law and Crime. And I thought of you as a mentor. And now the more I get to know you and know your criminal defense work, you were the former head New Jersey County prosecutor. You do TV, media, and analyzing. You've also done TED Talks, the speaker sirens and summations. I wanted to mention all of that because of the breadth of your experience and what you do. And I think both of us, I can say, really appreciate trial skills. But I want to start with this. The very first thing you said was, wow, I didn't realize the name of the podcast was The Deadly Seven. And I was actually looking at cases I'd handled and the 7 deadly sins. Tell me about that and your immediate reaction.
Yeah, I was like in complete shock. I mean, I know you. I'm on TV with you for many years. I consider you a dear friend. You're amazing talent. And I knew you had a podcast. So when you asked me to come on, I was really looking forward to doing it. But the funny thing is, I have a very spiritual bent to me, which has actually got me in trouble every now and again. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. But I used to tell my prosecutors, I was telling you before when I ran the prosecutor's office, that guys, stop looking at the nuts and bolts of like a case, like first we do this and then we do that. Intuit deep in your heart what we're on the front row of human nature. We see the good, the bad, the ugly. There's so much to take away philosophically, religiously, spiritually. There's so much texture and depth into it. And I used to analogize all the time that most homicide cases, when we were literally investigating them, I'm like, look at the 7 deadly sins. If you look at the 7 deadly sins, you can begin to see motive, opportunities, places to go investigatively. And I have never failed with regard to that. Of course, there's the virtues, the corresponding virtues from a religious context. When you're looking at a case, in a homicide case, you got to do two things where I've seen big problems. The first is not to jump. We do this as EMTs too, at what seems to be the problem. You need to eliminate, you need to rule out things. And a lot of times prosecutors and investigators tend to go in there and say, oh, it's the ex-husband, or they're in the middle of an acrimonious divorce, or there's an insurance policy. And all of a sudden, the whole trajectory of the investigation moves into a different place because they've now got confirmation bias. However, that said, you have to use your common sense when you're talking about doing an investigation. And I would always say to my prosecutors, look at the 7 deadly sins, because everything that I've seen in my lifetime, everything that you could think about humanity, the good, the bad, the ugly, and I'm not speaking religiously here, but it's in the Bible. It's been spoken about in the Bible, and the 7 deadly sins inform us with motive a lot of times. So that's why I literally started doing a number of different videos on what the 7 deadly sins and corresponding virtues are, because bottom line, last point, we could take away so much in what we do as TV anchors and legal analysts, and there's so much depth of what it is in the criminal justice system that can teach you and can train you and can make you a better person when you see the 7 deadly sins that people slip into. So I always say, when you get that in Sirens and Summations, when I lecture, I say, when you get that feeling, you know what that feeling is. When you get that adrenaline pumping, or like me, I gotta shut one thing. I should shut more than right here. I should shut it when I eat. I
That's
should shut
not
it when I talk. I should shut. But look, there's good and bad in that. But listen, take 2 more steps, 2 more beats. Stop, look, and go, because it is in that flash of a moment that I've watched people's lives completely deconstruct.
You're right, absolutely, and it's the fabric of America that this happens, and it continues to happen, specifically with school shootings. Every one of those, I would say, it's wrath at the core. Even if it's a loner and they seem like they're quiet and soft-spoken, I can't imagine, for me personally, the level of anger, the wrath that one must have to pick up a gun or guns, generally guns plural, and go to a school where they're innocent victims. Most often, they don't have criminal history. They haven't shot and killed anyone prior to the school shooting. And Bob, how do we explain it when, if we want to look at it and try to improve and do better? Michael and I talk about this. I feel like every week we get an alert, if not every day, of, oh, school shooting, oh, school shooting, oh, University of Georgia, that one was a hoax. Oh, here's another one, Minneapolis. It is all too common anymore.
There's no doubt in my mind that, and I'm going to use a metric that's different. We see it in TV, and you could say, well, maybe we're just seeing it more now because there's more coverage and
Sure.
social media. I look at this yardstick. I was an EMT for 10 years through college, high school, college, and law school. I stopped. I took a 34-year hiatus. I went back to it. It was hard.
I'm
And
so proud of you, though.
listen, you're plus 60, man. Go out there and do it. Stop saying you can't do things. You can do whatever you want. But anyway, what I've noticed, Judge, is in the 10 years I did it before, and thousands of calls, because I used to ride professionally and volunteer, I could count on one hand the number of psychiatric calls I had. Today, 50% of the calls I'm going to go on any given shift are psychiatric calls. And when I was prosecutor, so we have a mental health problem, okay? When I was prosecutor, I would listen to do more with less. We don't need all this money for mental health services. We don't, and then when the wheels would fall off the train and somebody would decompensate and do some horrible thing, people were in shock. But we have a mental health crisis problem that way. And then we have a social media problem. Just like bullying is amplified today. Back in the day, you got into a fight with somebody in the school and it was all over. Today, there are no boundaries. And I watch people who are trying to be relevant. We're all trying to be relevant to a certain extent. Don't get me wrong. But with the younger people who don't have a yardstick of what life was like prior to social media, they are frustrated. They're angry. I watch young kids posting wild things. I actually do this. I know it sounds crazy. And I look at how many likes and comments they have. And there are some people that get 0. They've done something really dumb, really stupid to getting 0 likes. And that is the kind of person where bit by bit, media post by media post, lack of authenticity, a lack of agency and control over their own lives, a lack of attention, stews and festers, and then they see other people creating conduct. And I'm going to, last point, go back to what Father Walter Heath told me when I was in college, which I thought was very prescient. He said that in light of not getting any attention, somebody who needs attention will take negative attention. They don't care whether it's good or it's bad. And I think we've gotten to a place right now where that's how these young kids are. And life is so unexamined, so underappreciated. The miracle of your birth is so depreciated now that killing other people is like a game.
It is. It's like a game. And I think video games, along with social media, play into that because there's no sense of the reality of what it means to shoot someone and the finality of what it means to shoot someone. And there's studies on suicide in which children who commit suicide also don't recognize at the time they do it the finality of what they're doing. And it's that undeveloped brain. And so many of these school shooters, Bob, are young. Their brains are not fully developed and they're making these impulse decisions that are affecting the lives of everyone. And then I have to say, okay, you were the head prosecutor. How do you deal with gun violence? Because you also have to then consider, how do these kids get guns? Where do they get the money? They take it from their homes many of the times. They take it from their families many of the times. My husband's a bird hunter, and I will never forget, before we had our first child, where are the guns? Well, they're right out there. I said, that won't work for me. And he was so proud that his wife let him buy the most expensive safe that existed, because I said, your guns will be locked up at all times. And if they're not, they're on eBay. So just know, and I was very sincere, and he's a gun safety guy, so he absolutely understood, agreed. They were never unlocked, and no child in our home, teenagers now, has the code to it, because I don't want anybody in there. And I just struggle with, what do you do about gun violence? If you were head prosecutor, how do you deal with it?
Well, we've actually talked about this a little bit before in that case where they charged the parents for the child that you
Ethan
start
Crumley.
holding parents accountable. What I found as prosecutor, which is really going to be counterintuitive to you, Judge, is that I would go out and talk about gun violence. I would talk about bullying. I would talk about the cyber criminal is in your kid's bedroom. He's literally in the bedroom, and you're letting it happen because you have these feelings of, I don't want to invade their privacy. And we have very loose parenting skills. I'm not gonna, in my opinion, we have like, parents want to be friends rather than, we hear this, but there's truth to it. And when you don't want to impinge on their privacy, I had zero, for as a matter of fact, diaries, drawers, whatever. So what did that do? Well, it was a deterrent effect. If I was going to do something that I shouldn't be doing, I shouldn't be saying this publicly, I had to make sure my parents didn't find it. I knew
Right.
I had to do something to hide it. But deep down, I knew when I was doing that I was doing something wrong, that I was doing something contrary to the values that my parents instilled. I'm sorry for those that are out there who are going to get upset about this. I'm not here to do kitty boo boo. The fact of the matter is, when you're treating your child like he's your friend or her friend rather than an actual person that needs to be disciplined and punished, you're making a mistake. When you're not watching what they're doing on social media, you have every tool available right now to make sure that they're not in harmful places. Gaming websites, guess what? There's a pedophile in there. There's potentially a stalker, a rapist, whatever you want to call it. You're foolish if you think. And I would give these lectures, gun violence. I would tell them, I know I live in a big Second Amendment county, big, whatever. And you talk about anything about their guns, and there's an immediate wall that goes up there, despite the fact that they watch people being killed, kids getting guns and killing other people. When you're saying, guys, just use some common sense and everything will go a lot better. Last point. I really believe deeply, deeply in this idea, and I know this as a prosecutor, and this is where Sirens and Summations actually started, was when I gave a lecture in front of 1,000 people about our drug epidemic and our mental health epidemic. And I said to people, look, what we've been doing for the past 40 years, coddling this situation, clearly is not working because the problem is getting worse. The problem is we have no more values. We have no more mores, as an mores, a way of dealing with things. Everything has been reduced to the lowest level of acceptable behavior, which is called the law. But the law should not be what we aspire to. We should be aspiring to greater ideals, the virtues, the opposite of the deadly sins. Okay, that's it.
What's right and wrong. It's what's right and wrong, and it's basic, and it should be a common sense understanding. But I'll tell you this, when I was director of Office of the Child Advocate, I knew the statistics on how many specific children died by what means throughout the state of Georgia, because we had to review all of those child death cases. And I would speak to friends, or more specifically, parents of children and that went to school with my kids. And most of the times they'd either A, not want to talk about it, or B, not believe me and say, oh, that can't be right. That can't be true. And I'm like, well, no. I know that's true. There's a lot I don't know, but I know that statistic. And I felt like it. And it's why I got into TV to talk about these things, Bob. I felt like I was trying to convince people of something that to me was so common sense, but a lot had a very much an attitude of, but that's not my kid. Those aren't my people. And I guess what I really want to say is, it's anybody, it's everybody. There are kids that seem to be the quote unquote perfect child doing everything right, everybody loves, a good person going to church, and yet they go to college and they suffer some type of mental health diagnoses, or God forbid, commit suicide. And so I guess what frustrates me is here's yet another example, and it's almost so commonplace. Eastman, when he shot up this school, the very first day of mass for these children going to this school, there was a story about a woman who's a pediatric nurse got called in because of the injuries. She gets called in, she goes to the hospital, Bob. She didn't realize it was her daughter's school. Her daughter was one of the ones who died as a result of the gunshot wound. Here she is serving as a pediatric nurse. It's like you serving as an EMT, only to realize it's one of her own that was killed by the school shooter. It doesn't make sense, but I digress. But really, at the end of the day, our criminal justice system, how do you handle this type of crime? This person killed themselves. If he had not, we've seen lots of others that go to trial. How do you handle as a criminal justice system the part of it that's supposed to be a deterrent? Because there is no deterrent for this kind of crime that I'm seeing.
Yeah, well, you see, that's a really, it's a deep question. It's a great question. And I would always say, like, everybody looked at the prosecutor's office when I was prosecutor as like the panacea of all problems. We were the panacea office. I'm like, I laugh, like, we're not the prosecutor's office. Look, the criminal justice system has certain tools, and those tools typically are a trial, and if you're over the age of 18, punishment. That is what it is. You go to jail. But I've always said, with these anger crimes, and anger really being defined where you're losing your reason, you're losing your ability to proportionately or rationally deal with a situation, the fact that you put somebody like that in jail goes to the point you just raised before. Everyone else looks at it and says, well, that's not my kid. That would never happen to me. So there's not even really a deterrent effect by putting people in jail. So what can we do in the criminal justice system? Well, I was very big on community affairs. It was the first unit I started. I went out and educated on bullying before bullying was a flavor of the day. I went out and educated on cyber crimes before cyber crimes were the part of the day. I built relationships in communities, minority communities, lower socioeconomic communities that had problems, and I wanted to know what their problems were, and we tried to get law enforcement assets to interdict and to build a relationship. But that's about as good as it's going to get. And if you don't give us funding, okay, like, we happen to have the greatest mental health resources in the jail, probably, I think, in any county in the country. But it is sad what I'm about to say to you here, Judge, and this is the truth. It is a sad reality, at least in the state of New Jersey, where the best mental health treatment you can get is in a county jail,
Yeah.
and not outside.
Yep. No, that's true here, especially in rural parts of the state, right? Like, I absolutely agree with you, and it is a really sad statement. Now, the victims of these shootings and the fact that these continue to happen, I think, as criminal defense attorneys. So I think viewers also want to hear about and listen to, how can anyone ever defend? We talk about this, constitutional rights. I have never had the ability to be a criminal defense attorney. It's not in me. However, I value any criminal defense attorney so much because they're protecting my rights as well as anybody else's. But you hear something, and again, Robert Westman took his own life. However, if he had not, we have lots of school shooters who have not taken their own life. How do you defend someone who has gotten to the point of anger that it's indiscriminate. They don't care who they hurt, who they kill, or what they do with the guns in their hands?
Well, I think it's a great question. It's funny. When I was a prosecutor, all I heard was, all you want to do is put innocent people in jail. And then I became a defense lawyer. It's like, all you want to do is, get guilty
Get them
people
on the
off.
streets.
If one has a more mature understanding of what is really going on in the criminal justice system, they would know that most of the time, at least in my practice, 97% of the cases do not represent horrific, horrible offenders like these people. They, in fact, would be shocked to know that they would come into the office, and I'm talking about prosecutors, and they would actually feel sympathetic when they watch the addiction issues, the mental health issues, and how just being charged is what we call collateral consequences: loss of job, loss of spouse, loss of income, loss of home. There are tremendous repercussions to this. So 95% of what we're doing every day is, one, testing the government's case to make sure it was done properly, because that doesn't just protect your client, that protects the next one and the one after that and the one after that. Like we talked about before, deterrence also occurs with police. I've been there. Half of my career almost being a prosecutor. I ran 44 police agencies. And I'm here to tell you, I'm sorry to say, while I support law enforcement greatly, there are many nefarious actors and there are many people who worse than nefariousness, are lazy, sloppy, and jump to conclusions. I've had homicide cases dismissed in this past year because they made mistakes. So from that standpoint and making sure that they don't get sloppy and they get the right person, there's a strong statistical percentage of people that are not guilty of what they're charged of or something less. But let's not look at that. Let's look at the one who's clearly guilty. The evidence shows they're guilty. There's no question. What do? I try to bring the rule of reason in terms of what the appropriate punishment is, understanding the prosecutor needs to do deterrence and have an accountability for the crime. But also, like I say, it doesn't mean you have to hit a fly with a sledgehammer. And a lot of times prosecutors are hitting flies with sledgehammers. And my job as a defense attorney is to position the client in a way where you get a more reasonable resolution that both sides can accept. So that's how you do it. Somebody like this, you got a really bad, really bad case, really bad victims, whatever. You rely on the fact that the defense lawyer is essential to make sure the system works, not for this guy necessarily, but for the next guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that the system works. And I think we have to your point with the 7 heavenly virtues and the 7 deadly sins and looking at the motive for these crimes. I think if we could all internalize that and look within ourselves to figure out how do these bad things happen, I don't think it means something's going to happen bad in my life no matter what because these horrible crimes are happening. I'm not that alarmist. Rather, I think, listen, in general, you can trust people. In general, good things happen to people. However, there can be some bad outliers. The school shootings are bad outliers, and at
Yes.
least be open-minded and receptive to the fact that if you think about these things and you think about it in the context of those people around you. I do a lot of speaking to kids. You know, kids are my thing, and I give them all my cell phone number, and I'm like, listen, you should have people to talk to in your life, and if you really don't, if you're really stuck and you want to call a lawyer who knows about kid law, call me. Anytime, text me, because I think every kid has to have a resource to listen to them. Let me get your final thoughts.
Yeah, Judge, I think this, I'm so glad. I love, I'm inspired by these conversations. If you were to watch my Sirens and Summations, you'll see I spend a lot of times in my newsletter on the meaning of life for like 5 or 6 chapters. I do that for a reason. There's too many 10 hacks on this, 5 ways to make your life better, stick your head in a tub of cold water in the morning, all these crazy things. What our children are missing, and maybe older than children are missing, values, tenacity, resiliency. Stop being a victim. Be the victor. Stop thinking that you're the only one who suffers. Stop thinking life is so unfair. Life is unfair. FYI, it is unfair. Crappy things happen to people. There's a difference between those who succeed and they use that as fuel. They use it as watering the seeds of something else in their life. I watch people sit there in the morass of their life, going down a spiral because they think life has cheated them, and then they want to know, why is it that their life is so bad? So when I coach people, I then go after the value piece. What are your value? What is your why? What's your spirit? What do you believe in? Once you do that, then the next question is change. Are you willing to change? Because most people aren't. And if you're not willing to change and answer that question, check that off. Yes, I will not coach you.
I love that. And I change every time I talk to you because you make me think, you inspire me. I do think of you as a mentor. And I will say it's been such a treat to have you on. And please remind us again. I just followed it on YouTube, but I haven't watched yet. Remind us about it, please, Bob.
Yeah, so I have on YouTube Sirens and Summations. That's pretty much my through line, or on LinkedIn. It's at YouTube. It's Bianchi Insights, Bianchi Insights. On YouTube. Love to have you join, subscribe, follow, comment. And it also follows the newsletter on LinkedIn. You can find me at R Bianchi ESQ there. Thank you, Judge.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, peace.